Hi, my name is Ann Locke, and this is the second episode of Lock and Loaded Storytelling. This is a place where I would take perhaps true stories or history and faith and then get them all to meet together. I would tell you a story that seems perhaps unrelated to any biblical truth, but somehow it's all going to mesh together in the end. So this episode is called The Train and the Book of James. What could a coal-burning freight train and the Lord's Brothers book of James possibly have in common? Well, you're about to find out. Stick around. I need to tell you, this whole thing happened in a place called Balvano, Italy. This was during the Second World War, and I need to show you what kind of a pickle the Italian people were in at this specific time. So let me go back and explain that to you and set the stage for the Balvano Train Disaster. So, picture the scene. Italy, 1943. Mussolini has been in power for 21 years, and the love affair between him and the Italian people, well, it's more than soured by this point. See, what began as a love affair, and what Mussolini said he would, produce pride and stability in the country, and the country was nowhere near any of those promises. So, Italy had been dragged into 3 conflicts. One was Ethiopia, then the Spanish Civil War, and then the occupation of Albania. And now he aligned himself with Hitler and the Germans in the Second World War. Not the right side to be on. So, Mussolini is not exactly loved at this point, and the things that he's doing, it's just further devastating the people in Italy, and their struggle is unbelievable in this year. They're paying such a steep price. For starters, Italy they had almost no oil, okay? No natural gas, no coal, no petroleum, and major mineral reserves they were without. They were just using like subpar coal, things that were actually illegal in places like the UK and the US, like lignite they were using instead of coal. So they're very vulnerable. They're relying on the imports of other countries, but the British naval blockade cuts off imports naturally, and Germany is not giving them the things they need reliably, and their stockpiles are running out fast. In the middle of the Second World War, Italy entered the conflict with these grand ambitions, but they had a very fragile foundation. Mussolini believed the war would be short and that he was just going to jump on the heels of Hitler and ride his coattails into this, that it would be a quick victory for the Germans and that they would dominate Europe. But the country of Italy was so ill prepared for this war, it's not even funny. Its industry was weak, its military was poorly equipped, and its economy already strained from years of colonial wars, like early campaigns in Greece and North Africa and East Africa. Well, it just exposed the weaknesses of this country in a brutal way. Italian forces suffered repeated defeats and required constant German rescue, which eroded their national pride and revealed how hollow the fascist propaganda really was. At home, shortages of food, fuel, and the most basic necessities was worsening rapidly, and Allied bombing brought the war directly to Italian cities. So by 1942 and then 1943, where we are here, the morale of Italy has collapsed, and the trust in Mussolini is gone, and now the population is just extremely exhausted. Okay, and what had begun as a bid for empire quickly turned into this national unraveling for the country of Italy. This all set the stage for Mussolini's fall. So their food shortages were severe, and Germany was treating Italy like a burden by this time. Like I said, Italy kept they kept picking fights where they shouldn't have, and Germany was getting tired of having to bail them out. So on July 24th of 1943, there was a meeting held by the Grand Council, the Fascist Grand Council, and Mussolini just thought, he was going to get all the support that he had been, but he'd be so wrong. Way off wrong. Basically, they said, you're done. You've lost the respect and the trust of the people, and we're removing your military authority, and we're going to just give it back to the king. Well, the king I'm talking about was King Victor Emmanuel III. So the very next day, Mussolini was ousted, and he was actually arrested and taken secretly in an ambulance. And so he was taken out of the picture for a while. Well, that evening, the king decided to appoint Pedro Badoglio. He was a marshal, and he became the head of the government. Well, imagine the Italians' relief, Mussolini was out. But you can't have a dictator in a communist place like this for 21 years and just pull the dictator out and think everything's going to be hunky-dory, because it's just not. There may have been celebration at the time, but removing Mussolini after 21 years caused holes. It caused problems on all fronts. So just some of those problems you'd have to think about would be like the fascist institutes didn't know what they're going to do. The military, they didn't know who to obey. And the public of Italy, they didn't even know what was going on. They didn't know who to listen to. They didn't know what was going on. So this Pedro Badoglio actually is not offering them any answers. And he's just the same fascist law, but a different face, it seems. He's quite afraid of the Germans and the Allies. He works behind the scenes with them to make an armistice. Well, he actually did. He formed one on September 3rd of 1943, but he didn't tell the Italians. They didn't know. Well, they'd find out 5 days later, unfortunately. They found out from the U.S. President Dwight D. Eisenhower, and that's how they found out. So now the Italian soldiers, they're disarmed. German troops flooded the cities. They're occupied, and basically they've become two countries, a split country. The South was under the king and Pedro Badoglio, and then the North was under German occupation at that time. Then the German commandos, believe it or not, they get together and they free Mussolini. So on September 12th, they pull him out of captivity. And on the 23rd of that month, Mussolini announces the creation of the Italian Social Republic. This act created two different governments. And there were people who were loyal to the king. There were people who were fascists. There were communists, monarchists, loyalists, liberals, German troops, militia, police, and you had a bunch of people in that country, and they were basically divided like a human's mind. And the war continues. The day after the Armistice de Cassibile, actually, Badoglio leaves Rome. And so the armies are left without orders, without leadership, and the people are left without any protection. I mean, it really was probably one of the worst military failures of all time. But anyway, the Italian people had bigger fish to fry. They had no fish to fry. They were actually starving at this point. Then on the 3rd of October, the Kingdom of Italy, which was the legitimate government of the South, officially declared war on Germany. So the Italian soldiers suddenly found themselves without orders, without commanders, without supply lines, immediately cut off. And many were disarmed by the Germans, and others simply watched their superiors flee. So, no one knew whether to report somewhere or hide or what. So they decided, I'm going to walk home. I don't blame them. At the same time, rations stopped, so their food scarcity is unbelievable at this point, and they're actually worse off at this point than the civilians are. So now you've got the legitimate monarchy in the south aligned with the Allies, and you got Mussolini's German-controlled puppet regime in the north. So who's in charge? Who's in power here? By late 1943, Italy was literally crumbling. At the point that this happened, the Italian people were barely eating anything. And all of a sudden, they had 1 million of their own military men wandering through their towns, and they had nothing to give them for food. It was that bad. So naturally, what do you do in a situation like this? Well, they started, like makeshift feeding stations, and some places, they just kept watering down the soup, so to speak. They had red lines, which, they'd be lines made of chalk or rope, and they would have barrels of water, and things aren't looking good, and then they would have a very cold, hard winter ahead of them. The country was now a battlefield, no kidding. Front lines had been drawn right through towns and countrysides, and farms were like destroyed, and the Germans had requested, we want the oil, and we want the grain, and we want the wine. Well, the Italian people are living on complete scraps by this point. One of the things that happened in this desperation was the development of the black market. It became the de facto food system for the Italian people at that time, and it was the direct result of wartime starvation. So with the government in chaos, the economy shattered, a civil war brewing between fascists and anti-fascists, and ordinary people had no support from the state, for crying out loud. The black market, il mercato nero, was the only reliable way for families to actually put food on their tables. And they needed it to survive. Hunger actually grew worse the following year in 1944. The government had imposed impossibly low official prices on food. Well, the farmers, they would have starved if they'd have sold at those prices. And so they turned instead to smugglers, middlemen, and civilians who are willing to maybe pay cash or barter for goods. The farmers weren't actually exploiting the people at this time, mind you. They were trying to stay alive in a system that had completely broken down. And so what emerged was a parallel economy that fed the nation when the state could not. And in many regions, that black market was the only functioning supply chain in certain places. For countless Italians, il mercato nero was the difference between starvation and survival during the darkest years of this war. Now, this brings me to a train. The night is March 2nd, 1944. It's still winter. A freight train was coming into the Balvano station. And a lot of people were actually like sneaking on because they would hop on these trains to, go in search of food, or maybe they just got food and they were returning home. So lots of people were scurrying in and on these trains, and they obviously were, stowaways. They weren't paying to be there. They weren't allowed to be there. They were freight trains. So what happened was, at that particular station, the gentlemen who actually worked at the Balvano station, they're like kicking people off, kicking stowaways off, and the rain's coming down, there's fog, it's miserable, the visibility is very low, and the freight train, which has more than 40 cars, had somehow been packed with over 600 desperate civilians. You have to understand, it's around midnight. These people are sneaking on, like some are laying on the roofs and squeezed between couplings and hiding in cars, and every one of them, like I said, had a reason to be there. It was all about survival. And you know, the railroad workers, they saw this. And you know, they did kick people off, but sometimes they just batted their eyes, because let's be honest, that was their countrymen, their cousins, their family, you know, and they knew that this war was tearing everybody apart and that people were starving. So on that night, the train 8017 started pulling 520 tons, unbeknownst to the railway workers at that time. The train was only moving at about 15 kilometers an hour, and it was heading up into a mountain. Now, there was a slight incline to that. It was a 1.3% incline. Mind you, that doesn't sound significant, but when you're pulling 520 tons and you don't have real coal, you are in bad weather, there's an incline, you can't get your speed up, your engines are old, they're not equipped for this subpar coal you're using, and you know, you're using stuff that's banned, and all of a sudden you've got a situation here that is completely the depiction of a perfect storm for disaster. The train, after midnight, like I said, started going through, and to go up into the mountain, there was this very long tunnel. It was called the Army Tunnel, ARMI. It was very long. So just about the time every single one of those cars had made it inside and no one had exited yet, the train stalls. All the cars are inside this covered tunnel. Quickly, the firemen, you know, they're shoveling coal into the fireboxes. But since it's not pure coal, it's just, you know, the substitutes are just burning quickly, and they're not giving like sufficient power for the engines. And it's producing just more and more smoke. But the smoke doesn't have anywhere to go because it's not getting the breeze off of the train. You know, it's right beside a covered tunnel, right beside a train. The smoke has nowhere to go. And with that smoke comes carbon monoxide. Yeah. So now you have a train stalled right in the middle of the tunnel past midnight on March 3rd, 1944. And there's two engines to pull this train. So one would be called your lead engine and the other one would be called your banker engine. And you have this smoke now that cannot be pushed out. And the smoke is just building and building, and the carbon monoxide is building silently in the background. Well, one of the drivers attempted to, you know, position the Johnson bar in reverse. And Johnson bar is a very large bar, and you can push it forward or you can pull it back, and it's got these notches that you know, these certain notches that you can move the bar back into. Well, in this particular case, the engineer, he was trying to move that Johnson bar in reverse and pull that train out of the tunnel. So while he's making this attempt, he drops to the floor. And then the fireman in that engine drops to the floor. Then the fireman drops in the other engine. And the engineer drops in the other engine. They've also come to carbon monoxide. So you have the very people who are supposed to get these 600 people, you know, up to the mountains, they're incapacitated. And it's after midnight. And these people are tired, and it's winter and it's cold. And they unfortunately are being poisoned by carbon monoxide, unbeknownst to them. And they fall asleep and they die. So before you know it, all these people are dead, and only one person from the actual train company makes it off this alive. He was positioned towards the back of the tunnel, towards the back of the train, so he was closer to the proximity of fresh air, and that's what saved him. So he makes his way, and he's got to walk now to Balvano station, and then he's got to tell them, what's happened. Well, it took him a while naturally to get back and tell them what happened, and by this time everybody is dead. They would bury those 600 people in a mass grave, believe it or not. The Balvano Train Disaster was so full of loss. It had two engines, both going in different directions. So what does this have to do with the book of James? Well, the first chapter of James will tell the tale. In verses 5 to 8, it says this in the NASB, and I think you'll get the correlation. But if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to all generously and without reproach, and it will be given to him. But he must ask in faith without any doubting. For the one who doubts is like the surf of the sea, driven and tossed by the wind. For that person ought not to expect that he will receive anything from the Lord, being a double-minded man, unstable in all his ways. Many people's minds act like those drivers on train 8017. You got one driver has a train going forward and the other one is trying to back up. And therefore the train isn't going to go anywhere. You're going to be stuck in a dark tunnel. A person being double-minded is very much the same. Their thoughts pull in opposing directions. This is what James was talking about when he said, for the one who doubts is like the surf of the sea, driven and tossed by the wind. Picture for a moment a beach, okay? The waves roll in and then they roll out. The waves come in and then they retreat. It's not the water that's determining where this is going to go. It's the energy behind the water that's propelling the water itself. That could be the storms of life, gravity. It could be different things that are affecting the momentum of that water. Well, now for a minute, let's imagine that you yourself, you're the water, okay? So the storms of life, pressures, noise, busyness, it's all around and it's pushing you in different directions. And if you're not anchored to something, pretty strong, you're going to get tossed about. So if you ever stood in water, and the waves were breaking over your body, you have to be on firm footing. If you don't have something to support you, you're going to fall down on your face for sure. This is just the way it goes. And the brother of Jesus, James, is understanding this analogy completely. And he's explaining it to you in this way. And it's just like the train. If you either go forward or you go backward. You can't be flipping back and forth and having two different opinions, because if you do, you'll be stuck in the dark. You'll be stuck in a tunnel, and you can't have two plans. When you drive a car, you've got reverse, you've got drive, and you've got neutral. If you put the car in neutral, you're not going anywhere. You have to commit. You have to put the thing in drive, and you got to commit, and you got to stick with it. And that's exactly what James says. He says, ask the Lord for wisdom. Ask in faith and don't waver. If you ask God in faith, it's a done deal. He will answer your prayer. Okay, but first you have to ask him for wisdom. So it'd be like, Lord, I need wisdom. I need it liberally. I need a lot of wisdom right now. I don't know exactly what I need to do, but I'm expecting you to tell me, and then you'll tell me what's next. And he's not going to lay it all out for you and give you the whole 411. No, God usually will be like, put a flashlight on one step. And then when you do step on that step, Then he puts a flashlight to the next step, and you'll step on that one. But until you step on that step, you will not know which way to go. So he's giving you direction. He gives it intermittently like that, oftentimes. But he does give direction, and come hell or high water, if you'll just listen to him, you'll just follow the steps he gives you, you're going to get out of that tunnel that you're in. If you lack wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to all liberally and without reproach, and it will be given to him. But let him ask in faith with no doubting. For he who doubts is like the wave of the sea, driven and tossed by the wind. For let not that man suppose that he'll receive anything from the Lord. He is a double-minded man, unstable in all his ways. That term double-minded, in the English, we would call it double-minded, but it was written in the Greek language, and Jesus' brother James coined the phrase, and it actually was double puffer, believe it or not. So it was referring to, someone who was a double puffer, like two-spirited, two opinions, double puffers, okay? Like double puffing, okay? So just like those engines were both puffing smoke up into that tunnel, that's what a double-minded person is doing. So, you're going to be driven back and forth. You've got to pick a direction. You got to commit to it, or else you're going to be bobbing up and down in an ocean that's going nowhere, and you'll have no control over where you're going. God's telling you this because he wants you to have some control over where you're going in your life. But if we make our mind either moving backwards in the tunnel or moving forward out of the tunnel, and we're of two minds about this, we're just going to get stuck. You have to commit. I'm telling you right now, you got to stop switching gears, okay? From forward to backward, or else you're going to get stuck. Just like they did on March 3rd, 1944 at the Balvano station and the Army Tunnel. I hope you will remember this event because it's a practical way of remembering what the Word of God is trying to teach you, the dangers of back and forth thinking in your mind. We have to make up our mind either way. And that's how we move out of the darkness. That's how we move out of the tunnel. Otherwise, we're staying in the dark. I'm telling you right now to get out there and stop switching gears. So I'm sure a lot of you probably are getting the idea of the danger of this double puffing, this double-mindedness. And I'm sure a lot of you people feel like that right now. So let me pray for you, for people who are lacking faith, who are double-minded, unknowing what to do, lacking faith. Let's pray. Thank you, Heavenly Father, in Jesus' name, for this time of fellowship. I ask that whoever's listening to me, Lord, that whatever is going on in their heart and mind right now, that they're divided about, that you would give them wisdom. You will pour it upon them, Lord, in such a strong way that they will know it's you. And Lord, for those people who you've already told them what the first step is and they haven't done it, I'm asking that they go back and revisit that. God's not going to give them another step. It's not rerouting like a GPS here. God's going to tell you to go back to where you didn't listen to him. Go back to the start. What was the first thing he told you to do? And do that first thing. And then he'll shine his light on you to see the next step and the next step. But you got to ask in faith. If you just commit to this, to God, and just ask in faith, he's going to show you exactly where you need to go. So I'm asking that you would bring all my friends out of the tunnels that they might be in proverbially at the moment. And ask that you would help them at this time to have more faith. Maybe lean on a friend and borrow their faith a little bit, but have more faith so that they too can get out of whatever tunnel is bothering them right now. Well, if you're longing for more stories stitched with faith and a touch of wonder, you know where to find me. Lock and Loaded. And next week, the episode 3 is going to be called Roger Bannister and a bunch of dead Hebrews in the desert. What did the runner Roger Bannister and all the Hebrews who died in the desert possibly have in common? What's the connection? How can you connect the dots? I'll see you next time. And if you like a good story, remember that I wrote this novella, Virginia's Quilt. And you can see details about that if you want to go on Amazon. It's around the world. Or if you want to buy directly from me, that's ann-lock.com. Until our next adventure, bye-bye for now.